for you is that it's so hard to get something to work, right? Many of you guys have tried anything. You have a new marketing channel, a new sales script, a new offer. You try a bunch of things, and then finally something works. The likelihood that you changing that thing and that next thing working is actually statistically very low. Think about how many different things you had to try before something actually worked. And so the idea is, okay, I have these limited resources. I can allocate them to take a risk and roll the dice, or I have this thing that I know works, and I need to jam more into that machine, which is why the highest risk-adjusted return move. I get as much as I can. I have as little as I can. When you're looking at returns, maximizers win. So what's the difference between first place, gold in the Olympics, and second in the Olympics, silver, right? A tenth of a second in a race. But what is the realistic difference, the real world or pragmatic difference between being the best in the world and second best? Everything. And so when you're talking to an Olympian, you're talking to somebody who wants to be the top 1%, 0.01%, 0.0001%. Diminishing returns are still returns. You need to do more because you're trying to win, not be cute about saying that you had great return. And I say this as somebody who was a converted optimizer. So in the earlier part of my life, I really prided myself on doing school with as little work as possible. I was like, you nerds, I was like, you guys needed to study. I can walk in and hit a 91 with no study. And I'll tell you the story that really, really changed my life. So this guy named Kemp Knott, he was like, and hopefully Kemp, maybe you'll see this. I gave Kemp a hard time. I did when I was in high school. And he was a kid who didn't catch on to stuff as fast. And Kemp's a successful guy now, he's done great. But this thing happened. So all of high school, I kind of gave this guy a hard time. And when we went to go apply to colleges, I wanted to go to Duke. So Duke's the top 5 school in the US, and I didn't get into Duke. I ended up going to Vanderbilt, which is also obviously a great school, but I wanted to go to Duke. And guess who got into Duke? Kemp Knott. And so what was really interesting is that this whole time, like, Kemp would go to study hall. He'd be like, teacher, you forgot to assign his homework. Like, he was that guy, right? And I honestly, hall, he'd be like, teacher, you forgot to assign his homework. Like, he was that guy, right? And I honestly just really disliked him, but mostly because it probably just reminded me of my own inadequacies. Of like, I was just unwilling to do the amount of work that he was, and I shamed him for doing the amount of work that he did. I was like, you have to work so hard just to try and come close to me, right? But in the end, he got into the better college, and so it was this really humbling lesson for me that none of the colleges cared that I worked less than him. They just cared about who had the best applications and who had the best grades. And it was this really very eye-opening experience. And so when I went to college, I had a different frame that I was like, well, I'm not going to lose. I want to go here and I want to maximize. I want to study all the hours of the day that I'm not in class, at the gym, or at the cafeteria. I'm in the library. And you can ask anyone that I ever went to school with if you ever meet them. Like, that's where I was. I was in the library 12 hours a day because I was like, well, if I just study more than everyone, I'll get good grades. And that worked out pretty good. That's just kind of a little bit of framing around why I have such a strong affinity for more. Now, I'll give you a second, kind of a little bit more heady research. I talked about how more is the highest risk-adjusted return. I talked about how diminishing returns are still returns. They're still output, right? The next piece, though, is that change has a fixed cost and a variable reward. All right, so let me explain what that means. So I want you to imagine that this line right here, ooh, nice and wet. How I like it. My markers, calm down, guys. Okay. So I've got this line. This represents your revenue or whatever your current level of activity or output is. Okay, now, what happens is most entrepreneurs, they say, you know what, I'm going to change something. They think they're going to change something and things are going to get better, right? You tweak something, you mess around, you change your page, change your script, change your onboarding process, whatever, right? So then what happens? Well, if there's people involved, typically output will go down. You have to retrain the team. They have to practice. This variable affected 2 other variables you didn't know about. And this is completely based on my observation. You typically get about a 20% decrement or decrease frame strategy for you run this. Most people think about business strategy. I got this from Sharon. I love this. I'm using it all the time. It's so good. Most people think about business strategy like they think about making dinner. So they go to their kitchen, they open up the fridge, they look what's inside, and say, what am I going to whip up? Right? That's how they think about business strategy. But the question that we should be asking isn't, what am I going to whip up from what's inside the fridge? We should ask the question, what the f do I want to eat? And then go get the ingredients and go make it happen. When you're saying, I'm only going to take 1 bet or 2 bets this year that are going to be material, then it forces you to be like, it's got to be worth it. Because here's the part that no one else knows. If you change nothing, believe it or not, people get better at their jobs. They get more skilled. And so you'll typically have 1, 2, 3% increases that happen kind of month over month from you just not changing anything, from just leaving it alone. And so this has taken me so much time because I'm a yes hinge, right? I'm like, let's do it, let's shake it up. But why? Because the times I've made the most money in my life have not been when I've been changing the most. It's actually when the business has been really boring. We're just blocking and tackling, doing it over and over again. And so this is something that some people never learn. Honestly, a lot of entrepreneurs never learn this. And